This is Ezekiel chapter 35, verse 5. Because thou hast had a perpetual hatred, and hast shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword, in the time of their calamity, in the time that their iniquity had an end. Shalom. First off, I'd like to give in all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. Second, I'd like to give a double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well, who continue to teach us this truth. And a salutations to you, Akim, out there doing the work of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai sincerely. All right, this is the brother Kakam coming at you with another lesson. And the name of this lesson is The City That Bombed Itself. All right, and this is a historical lesson, more so modern history, but it kind of outlines the way that the so-called white man deals with our people. And when I say our people, I'm talking about you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, and the people that descend from them. All right, the so-called white man deals with our people with disproportionate force. And I'll argue that the so-called white man also is the reason why when we have so-called blacks in power or so-called Hispanics in power, they are emboldened to, or they want to show out and be accepted by the whites. So what ends up happening is that they end up treating our people, disproportionately messed up. All right. And so we're gonna look at this article from Vox News, and then we're gonna watch. I'm gonna put a video from the I believe it's Vice. This is kind of the scene here. Row houses burned after local officials drop a bomb on the Move House, home of the Black Liberation Group, in Philadelphia on May 13th, 1985. So the article is titled "The Day Philadelphia Bombed Its Own People: An Oral History of a 1985 Police Bombing That Changed the City Forever." As smoke rose from 6221 Osage Avenue, Philadelphia residents watched through their windows or television screens in the state of stunned disbelief. Their city had just bombed its own people. On the evening of May 13, 1985, longstanding tensions between MOVE, a Black liberation group, and the Philadelphia Police Department erupted horrifically. That night, the city of Philadelphia had dropped a satchel bomb, a demolition device typically used in combat laced with Tovex and C4 explosives, on the MOVE organization, who were living in the West Philadelphia row home known to be occupied by men, women, and children. It went up in unextinguishable flames. 11 people were killed, including 5 children and the founder of the organization. 61 homes were destroyed, and more than 250 citizens were left homeless. So you see, you cannot build in another man's kingdom. This is why the Lord tells us not to try to take up arms and do our own thing and try to, go up against this man, because this man is an absolute animal. Here's an aerial view. It says a view of Osage Avenue in Philadelphia just 2 days after a shootout and bombing between police and MOVE. It says, for the next several years, a confrontation with MOVE would be remembered as an ordeal that transformed the fabric of the city. The show of force, unjustified to many, solidified mistrust between Philadelphia's residents and government. The story is a parable of sorts. It's a parable of how the unthinkable comes to happen, said Jason Oster, the director of Let the Fire Burn, a documentary about the bombing. It's a tragedy, in my opinion. Everyone who was an adult in the city failed that day, collectively. The whole city failed. MOVE, not an acronym, was a political and religious organization whose principles were anti-government, anti-technology, and anti-corruption. Its creator, John Africa, born Vincent Leaphart, was a West Philadelphia native and Korean War veteran whose ideology combined Black revolutionary ideas with environmental and animal rights, as well as back to nature movement. Here we got photos of the guy here, John Africa. This is his woman, I believe. She's actually in a YouTube video that I watched about this situation. One of the things that the Israelites, the so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, and the people that descend from them, but particularly Judah, all right, the so-called Negroes don't understand is that they cannot go against the so-called white man's will. They cannot, because a so-called white man knows no bounds when it comes to violence. You know, a so-called white man knows no bounds when it comes to violence. It's his gift. You know, it says MOVE was founded in 1972 and still exists today, though its members' numbers are unknown. Members live communally and describe themselves as a family. It says changing their names to Africa out of reverence for their founder and for the continent. And that's the problem, man. The Lord wasn't with them. The Lord wasn't with them, man, because we're not Africans, all right? We are Israelites. It says, in non-violent but disruptive demonstrations, members protested at zoos, pet stores, and political rallies. The group believed in composting, homeschooling, and a diet of raw foods and spoke out against war and police brutality. They maintained a complicated relationship with Philadelphia residents. Some sympathized with their mission, while others found their lifestyle to be disruptive. Members frequently had run-ins with authorities. In 1978, MOVE engaged in a 15-month standoff after then-Mayor Frank Rizzo, notorious for a volatile relationship with Black residents and activist group, ordered the group to be removed from their home. The confrontation ended in the death of a police officer, for which 9 members of MOVE, nicknamed the MOVE 9, were controversially convicted and given life sentences for. It says 4 years later, MOVE relocated to a quiet, largely middle-class African-American residence on Osage Avenue. Their neighbors continually complained to the city about trash around their row house, confrontations with residents, and that MOVE members broadcast sometimes obscene political messages by bullhorn. After they'd spent 3 years on Osage Avenue, the then mayor Wilson Good, the first African-American mayor of Philadelphia, gave the order to evict them. What began as a door-to-door evacuation of the neighborhood that night before it became a violent day-long ordeal no one in the community could have foreseen. And this is exactly why we say you cannot take up arms against the so-called white man. Here you have 3 pictured people, 3 pictured who will probably be dead people very soon. These are going to be very dead people very soon, holding shotguns. This is why we tell, our people, the Israelites, we just got to wait upon the Lord, man. We just got to wait upon the Lord, because there's going to be no violence to take against the so-called white man. The so-called white man has the power of the government, all right? The full power and support of the government. It says MOVE members. This caption says MOVE members hold sawed-off shotguns and automatic weapons as they stand in front of their barricaded headquarters on May 21st, 1977. Here's Mayor Good, and this is Ramona, Africa, who is part of the MOVE 9, as mentioned. Only 2 people survived the bombing: Ramona, Africa, then 29, and a child, Birdie, Africa, then 13. Later known was Michael Moss Ward, later known as Michael Moses Ward. Both were badly burned, despite 2 grand jury investigations, a civil suit, and a commission final report that cited the bombing as reckless, ill, and hastily approved. No one was ever criminally charged for the attack. Survivor Ramona, Africa, immediately went on to serve 7 years in prison on rioting and conspiracy charges for arrest warrants before the bombing. Neighbors returned to shoddy construction in 1986, and by the early 2000s, two-thirds of the neighborhood was bought out by the city. Today, the houses are largely vacant. The bombing, now deemed one of the worst tragedies in the history of Philadelphia, lives in the memories of the city's residents. A few years later, the Waco siege scandal between law enforcement and a Texas religious sect would sear itself into the country's consciousness. The move bombing remains largely forgotten nationally. And that's kind of what happens, man. That's kind of what happens when, first of all, many things. This is what happens when you don't follow the law, statutes, and commandments of Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai. Because if they were doing that, they wouldn't be trying to do no back to Africa type of situation. They wouldn't be doing none of that nonsense. What they would be doing would be following the Lord to the best of their abilities. But they didn't do that. They wanted to take up arms and show power and show face and actively rebel against the police. The scriptures say, agree with thy enemy. Unless, roughly paraphrasing, agree with thy enemy, unless he takes you to jail. All right. So this was part one on the city that bombed itself. I'm gonna go through a couple scriptures and then I'm gonna play a video as well for the next parts. I'd like to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai. Number one is the apostles and elders of the great millstone who rule well, who continue to teach us his truth. And salutations to you, Akim, out there. And until next time, shalom.